Nadia from St. Petersburg State University and from the University of Oregon. And at the moment, I just got to know she is an incoming PhD student of the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures at Harvard. Her today's contribution is on the contemplative sign for the potential demise, a look at the abandoned Soviet garden cities.
Yes, thank you, Susan, so much for the introduction, and I'm very happy to participate in this panel. Let me quickly share my screen. Okay, this should work, right? Okay.
Yes. Yes, perfect.
Okay, so this specific subject was part of my larger research on trying to find the artists working in contemporary Eastern Europe and dealing with urban spaces, specifically former industrial neighborhoods, and carving out new non-nostalgic object of looking at these spaces. I was working both with poetry and photography, and so today I'm going to be speaking specifically about one photo project by the contemporary photographer Anastasia Tsider. And her project's called Arcadia. I'm going to briefly talk about the subject of the photo project. So Tsider was trying to capture, it's an ongoing project, it's been going for several years now, the abandoned state of the garden cities, which is a pretty old idea, originated in the end of 19th century in United Kingdom, and then kind of popular in the Russian Empire, or at least we know that people were excited about it. The idea was of creating some sort of socialist paradise, a utopian urban city plan that would combine industrial space for the workers, the living space for them, and then the green recreational spaces when they can rest. And so this idea became fully embodied after the war, when in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was a large expansion of the existing cities in the Soviet Union and also the building of the new ones. My own hometown was built almost from scratch in the 50s. Using the idea of the garden city, combining living and working places and leaving large green recreational gardens kind of embedded within this urban space. As you can see and read from the description from her own project, Tsider explains that after the fall of the Soviet Union, these green territories became kind of uncared because they no longer belonged to the factory, and they started to reclaim this space and grew completely wild. And so that's what she was trying to capture. She traveled quite a bit, and her project geography is pretty vast. They are shot in the cities of Russia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. And this is maybe worthy to note that this project is part of the larger wave of interest of Russian contemporary photographers to the post-Soviet landscape, and was originally presented in an exhibition called The New Landscape in a form of digital prints. So the title of the project, Arcadia, envelops the photographs in a long pictorial and literary tradition. And from the way Sider describes her own work in a curatorial note, it's clear that the central intention of such naming was to articulate the visual alignment with the romantic depiction of overgrown ruins, along with the broader pastoral depiction of the wild nature of Arcadia. The image of Arcady, as widely accepted as ideal realm of perfect bliss and beauty, can rightfully so be seen or read as nostalgic because of the various steps of becoming of its myth, of removal of space and time, and also radically idealized by Ovid. However, I argue that even though one can feel a certain association between the lushness of overgrown parks on Sider's photographs and the sentimental Arcadian landscape, there is a subtle but persistent undercurrent tying these photographs with a version, the original version of Arcadian myth, studied best by a famous essay by Erwin Panofsky, that meditates on the death in Arcady, the themes of inevitable passing and decay. First appearing in a visual depiction of Arcadia in the 17th century in the form of a tomb with an engraving even in Arcadia, death holds sway. This interpretation of Arcadian myth steps away from the nostalgic idealization of the past and instead dwells in the present in a way that awakens and sharpens the understanding of the mortality. It appears that this lineage of Arcadian myth of dwelling on death and passing influenced the development of the landscape design of the Romantic gardens, which was seeking to imagine Arcadia as a physical space, and might be the closest embodiment of the Arcadian myth to the subject of Sider's photographs. So on the one hand, the actual Arcadian paradise that the Romantic fashion invented, but also the garden cities that were also containing this utopian seed in them. These gardens were designed as spaces of, and I'm talking about Romantic gardens, as spaces of direct experience, evoking specific feelings and philosophical thoughts for a person on a stroll, end quote. A garden building built as a ruin would provide a contemplative sign for the potential demise of any great civilization and serve as a warning to the contemporary viewer. And not all photographs in Arcadia depict ruins, and some of them show the still standing buildings and objects, which I believe makes a reflection on a fallen empire of the Soviet Union even more powerful, if not politically charged, as it layers the timelines to accentuate and dwell on a concept of inevitable passing. And I believe Arcadia, the photo project, also invites us for some kind of philosophical walk. One White Sider is working visually with a previous tradition of depicting landscapes, area landscapes in Arcadia, is through light. That kind of light that it was evocative of the first landscape paintings, paintings that anticipate photography's light effects. For instance, Claude Lorrain's landscapes, which were bathed in warm, sumptuous sunlight, or quote, his pictures conjured up an imagined antiquity in Arcadia with long shadows and deep horizons. This kind of light signified both dawn and dusk, metaphorically, both the beginning and the end. The light in the photographs from Arcadia is similarly elusive. Most of the photographs are imbued with a warm light that sometimes is the clarity of a morning, sometimes the fullness of a sunset. As you can see in the picture, in the bigger picture here on the left, the row of tall poplars casts long shadows, which merge with the shadow in the foreground. The cone of the shadow on the asphalt contrasts with the luminous space that peeks out from between the buildings and trees. The light of the photographs lures us into the equilibrium of times, and most importantly, washes out the nostalgic tint The cyclicity of morning and evening, of rising and falling, create a serious obstacle to nostalgia's claim on the uniqueness of the experience. While on some of the photographs, vegetation takes most of the space, the main visual antithesis of Arcadia as a whole is more articulated on other pictures like these ones, where the white or pale colored strict forms of the buildings contrast with the flexible, chaotic green of the gardens. The relations between the two in the photographs are pretty complex. Inhabited spaces in their hierarchy of lines seem indifferent to the ways of vegetation that carry the force of reaching out and expansion. We observe the contours of order dissolving in the softness of grass. In her book, Exposed: Environmental Politics and Pleasure in Posthuman Times, environmental critic Stacy Alaimo dedicates a chapter to the question of what proximity of controlled inhabited spaces to wilderness can offer in terms of reflection on our own situatedness. Alaimo's argument focused on the great potential of softening and eliminating the borders and walls that are supposed to protect the inhabited spaces from the wilderness, and of introducing the element of interconnection, openness to what she calls the unexpected. Quote, "An ethics of inhabiting revels in the pleasure of interconnection and the joy of the unexpected." She argues that the garden in the history of Western modernity is merely an extension of the house itself, fenced, bordered, and clean, as was the case with the carefully controlled park areas of the Soviet 60s. Alaimo's thinking is engaged in how the introduction of the pleasure of interconnection can offer a more productive or creative response to the issues of protecting the ecology. But I also believe that this way of thinking is interesting in consideration of revaluation of our relationship towards the non-places and the nostalgic voids left by the recent historical events. And interestingly, Roland Barthes also calls the essential gesture of the photographer is to surprise. So also a way of interaction that provokes an unexpected response. It suggests playful interaction. One way of achieving the openness and interconnectedness capable of fostering creative dialogue with abandoned places would be to reevaluate our role as spectators. It is possible that the medium of Arcadia makes us spectators, like lookers at the photographs, observers of the images of wild vegetation. Yet, I think the depicted ruins, trees, and thickets seem to be in a state of constant movement themselves and suggest interaction and offer it to us. We can see the grass growing through the tile or the ivy slowly creeping up the building. Alaimo, collecting examples from unplanned gardens, quotes the artist Patricia Johansson, who said that the experience of such gardens, so the abandoned or wild gardens, not controlled ones, turns spectators into participants, ensuring both a creative response and some consideration of forces that affect the landscape and our lives. Photographs of Arcadia are themselves such a creative response. This is on the left, a screenshot from a video, the only video that's part of the project that supplements the project and is a compelling example to me of this kind of introduction of playfulness or joy with the wild landscape. In the video, she puts a firecracker in the abandoned carousel. The reflective and creative engagement with the landscape in Arcadia puts us in a kind of middle of it, or brings us in, because the vantage point of photography is always from the inside and within the green spaces. One of the definitions of nostalgia by Svetlana Boym as guilt-free homecoming and ethical or aesthetical failure And here I want to make an argument that there can be no way to resolve the nostalgia for the Soviet Union, as long as the general narrative about it, that it was a catastrophe that happened to us, that destroyed the places that people loved or enjoyed. And the creation of the non-nostalgic visual language is also an attempt to a new approach to the spaces around us that can turn that narrative of passive mourning or melancholia into an active practices, joyful practices of conversation and reflection. The relationship of the inhabited space and the green spaces on the photographs is not that of strict opposition exactly, and the most captivating elements of the photographs are the ones depicting the ways the gardens spread into the urban landscape and interact with them in the most interesting ways. Okay, I have like very little time left, right? Okay. One can even argue that fences and the greenery kind of permitted from the fences is a separate motif in Arcadia. And here I want to make a quick argument about how the nostalgia and the generating of the solidified identity that also one talks about can be discussed through the idea of disturbance as resistance, mainly offered by Lee Edelman, and the idea that one can never acquire or oppose an identity, but one can and should disturb one. And I believe what we can witness in the photographs is this beautiful, subversive disturbance of the strict lines and forms of the former ideologized spaces. In conclusion, I just want to say that as neighborhoods change and their appearance undergoes further transformations, the new inhabitants might not have the same attachments to spaces that once had special social meaning, like the Baden Gardens from Citrus Arcadia. It is a site of disconnection from the past, and at the same time, it marks the potentiality of reestablishment of meaning for those spaces, a chance for an intervention against further exclusion and abnegation of them. I think Tyler achieves in Arcadia a look at the overgrown spaces that accentuates and reveals the ideologized and idiosyncratic presence in our everyday life. Her optics engage with the Edenic imagery of Arcady, and in this way have ability to address the nostalgia surrounding these places, while also exploring the subversive and mobilizing potential of the new romantic, mainly the resistance to the exploitation of nostalgia and a chance to reevaluate the relationship with the recent history through creative practices and direct experience of these places. That's all I have.
Thank you so much, Nadia, for the presentation of this really exciting project. Yes, many very interesting suggestions. I mean, for me, as not all sites that are shown on these photographs are abandoned, so I would say many of these houses are there are still people living in them. So for me, the perspective from outside, so it's obvious that the addresses and also the point of view is from an aestheticization from outside, which gives these pictures. So the aestheticization is one that gives these sites a kind of touch of zone. It transforms these buildings and sites into a specific zone of melancholy. And so this point of view from outside is very interesting. And the opposition of nostalgia and melancholy probably is also very, very important for your argument. But as the project you presented is very much the opposite of a strategy of iconoclasm, I would say it would be good for us to listen to the second contribution now, by Valentina Harjun, who will talk just about strategies of iconoclasm, the Leninopad, in the Ukrainian context. Valentina Harjun is professor at the University of Nizhyn, Gogol State University, and she's an expert in socialist realism in Soviet literature in the Ukrainian context. The canon she published on the canon of in Soviet times and comparing Ukrainian and Russian literature. And she also wrote about the correlation of ideology and literature, and her current book project is on exhibiting the Soviet era in Ukrainian museums. Please, hello, Valentina, everyone. And we can then have the discussion of the two contributions together after Valentina's talk.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Susan, for a warm introduction. Thank you, Valerie, for inviting me for this conference. I'm really enjoying participating. And let me start as an introduction with my personal experience. It was February 2014. When I was sitting in a bus approaching the main square of my native town, Nizhyn, then the bus suddenly stopped, and I could see a spectacular view. Then thousands of people, they applauding right in the moment that Nizhyn Lenin monument was demolished. It was one of the most impressive moments in my life. But this event was just one among others happening in Ukraine at that time. In particular, in February of 2014, around 374 Lenin monuments were demolished all around Ukraine. And this particular phenomena was lately called Leninopad, or Lenin fall, or shedding Lenin monuments. So in my presentation, I'm going to analyze Leninopad as Ukrainian variation of monument wars, and I will try to cover the entire period of Ukrainian independence, exemplifying how Ukraine was dealing with Soviet monumental legacy. And I would also like to identify at the very beginning that even though the term Leninopad was initially covering only and specifically Lenin monuments, now it's been used more widely to cover the entire legacy, monumental legacy of the Soviet times. So in my presentation, I will try briefly cover several questions. The first one, why monuments matter. The second one, what is the contemporary historical and cultural circumstances, and who are the main memory actors who initiated this issue of dealing with monuments, demolishing monuments. And more important, how does dismantling monuments as a mnemonic security action, how it influences or does not influences our understanding of the Soviet past. Let me start with the first one. And very simple, very briefly, to say that monuments is about power and about representation. And here, just jumping into historical context, because Sovietization of Ukraine can serve as a best example of how and why monuments matter. Bolsheviks occupied Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, 2 times, and both times, alongside with the terror, what they did, they erected Lenin monuments right in the center of Kiev. Until the end of the Soviet Union, 4,500 Lenin monuments were around Ukraine. So, and density of monuments per square kilometer in Ukraine were higher than anywhere else in the former USSR. So I would suggest and even use this kind of metaphor that Ukraine was preoccupied by Lenin monuments, and it was one of the way how Ukraine was Sovietized. Here, observers and researchers distinguish 4 waves of dehumanization of Leninopad. The first one, and the most impressive, was right in the end of the Soviet Union, at the beginning of initial years of Ukrainian independence. There around 2,000 Lenin monuments were demolished. But there is a regional specificity. They were demolished primarily in Western Ukraine, where anti-Soviet and anti-Russian sentiment was much more stronger, just because of historical circumstances. The western part of Ukraine joined Soviet project later than eastern part, as a result of implementation Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which means in 1939. 3 other ways were less impressive. So the initial, the starting point of the phenomena, which we now called Leninopad, happened during Euromaidan, or Revolution of Dignity, in December 8, 2013, concerning Lenin in Kiev, which is called Bessarabka Lenin, after the place and it was standing. It was a very spectacular view, and the pictures of fallen Lenin right in the center of Kiev can be found in domestic newspapers and in foreign newspapers. It was highly covered, and this spectacular image was also identified as a picture representing the revolutionary of dignity. But just returning one step back, when I looked at the whole 2013, so before the initial start of Euromaidan, this grassroots initiative, it was several very interesting cases of vandalizing Lenin monuments throughout Ukraine. So it was kind of a few cases. It means that this year was already kind of, moving towards the dealing with Lenin monuments much more actively, dismantling them or vandalizing them. But still, at this moment, December 8, it's kind of officially recognized at the beginning of Ukrainian Leninopad. And it was also called the popular dehumanization because it was grassrooted initiative. The situation, yes, and through 2014, it was the main issue, general issue everywhere in Ukraine. And here on pedestal, you could see the timing of demolishing Lenin through this year. But the situation slightly changed in 2015, just because so-called dehumanization laws were passed by Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada, Ukrainian Supreme Council. It's very famous law and highly discussed. Actually, Verkhovna Rada passed these laws with no substantial discussion, and on the background with a high critique coming from domestic and international historians who protested against these laws. One of them called the Law of Ukraine on condemning the communist and national socialist totalitarian regime, which means that now the grassroots movement became kind of a state policy. So this law foresees several changes. The first one, change in toponyms, also throughout Ukraine, starting from big cities as Dnipropetrovsk, which now is Dnipro, up to the small villages and renaming streets. Second, changing calendar of holidays and the remembrance days. And the most impressive was introducing the Ukrainian Army Day on October 15, in contradiction to the Soviet Army Day on February 23rd, and modifying commemoration practices. It was a Remembrance and Reconciliation Day was introduced in May 8 as an addition to the celebration of Victory Day on May 9. So here, dealing with monument received kind of the context of dealing with much more issues regarding the Soviet past. So even though that a lot of monuments were demolished with no problems, this process reveals several problems, several contested cases, and here I'm going to briefly discuss three of them. The first one, monument to Shors, right in the city of Kyiv, which exemplified the tension because the historical issue and the aesthetical issue. Shors was Bolshevik with Ukrainian origin, and he's listed as anti-hero, and the main government body who is doing this type of stuff, the Institute of National Remembrance, he listed him as undesirable hero, and the monument to be demolished. But unfortunately, it shouldn't be done because the monument included in the register of cultural heritage. So since of this contested issue, this monument was the object of several attacks, and on the pictures you could see how local authorities trying to protect the monument up to the moment that the situation should be resolved. So another contested case, the Tutin monument, and it exemplifies a collision hero and anti-hero. If you would simply just look at the Wikipedia page in Russian and in Ukrainian, you would get an information what does it mean hero and anti-hero. Russian Wikipedia would present the Tutin as a brave general, while Ukrainian also saying that he's a brave general, but he was responsible for terrible loss then Vatutin was trying to lead the releasing Kyiv from Nazi occupation. And he was also considered as anti-hero because he fought on the Soviet side, while Bolsheviks was trying to release Ukrainian army in Kiev in 1921, and also he's famous as a general who fought against Ukrainian nationalists. But this monument also can be removed since there is also a collision. He also recognized as a fighter against Nazi Germany, and also because monument on the tomb can be removed. So this monument also became an object of vandalizing, and on the picture to the right, you can see the protest of Ukrainian nationalists who put the sign saying executioner who was executed by Ukrainian nationalists. And it's so this monument still on the place. It hasn't been removed, but there's a historical irony because a Ukrainian nationalists succeed in a different issue. They actually succeeded in renaming General Vatutin Avenue to the avenue named after a nationalistic general. And the third contested case, legendary Tachanka in Kakhovka. Institute of National Remembrance listed this as a monument to be removed by local authorities, and it's very telling case. Local authority protested against this, saying that this monument lost its ambivalent meaning. It was placed in the in a site, then opened the way for the Bolshevik army to occupy Crimea. But local authorities saying that for that moment, this monument is considering in a completely different way. Recently, it's been used as a starting point for bikers. You could see on the picture at the bottom. So up to now, there is still tension. Then the center is kind of not pressing, but asking or making suggestions to remove this this monument, but local authorities still keeping their own opinion. So just quickly to make a preliminary summary, Leninapad has a long unfinished history of dealing with monument, and we can tell that this is kind of Ukrainian call for criminalizing communism. And this movement has its own kind of evolution from debate to battle, and the battle started in the moment of social uprising as Euromaidan, and even more than we experienced first victims. It's very important that society feels this existential threat, and it gives much more courage to move forward. And as Miroslava Hartman said, a Lenin fall is catharsis, a collective, static, performative action that seeks to rewrite Ukrainian national narrative. But also we could see that contested monuments are object of endless disagreement. I could distinguish at least three of them. The first and most obvious, ideological, but I wouldn't say that this is the main one, absolutely not. I would draw attention much more to personal, regarding like individual family histories, or regarding monuments as a neighborhood or community markers for people see on a routine basis. So then the monument is demolished. What is next? What is an afterlife of demolished monuments? How to use places of this empty places who should stand on this pedestal? How to do with another legacy associating the difficult past? And the most important, as I already emphasized, and I will do it again, does dismantling monuments mean a radical change in society's understanding of common past? So here's several approaches. The first one, neglecting. So regarding this, Lenin monuments as is a garbage of history. And you can find a lot of examples collected by two foreign journalists in absolutely amazing book, Looking for Lenin. So another approach, which is very close to what we are discussing during our conference, it's recycling, utilizing or selling. And I would like to mention two, the most iconic examples. Then the bronze Lenin monument from Lviv was melted down and used to build a monument to victims of a communist regime, which kind of very symbolic action. And another one, Lenin monument from Rivne became a monument to Taras Shevchenko, the iconic, the main, the leading author in Ukrainian literature. And here in the picture, the recent one which came to my hand, if I'm not mistaken, it's from Zhytomyr region, and this case was highly discussed in Ukrainian Facebook. If you could see, it's a very specific recycling attempt. Then the body still remains from Lenin pedestal, from Lenin monument, and the head is replaced, the head of Shevchenko. So it's kind of a new Ukrainian monster, and Ukrainian general public and researchers discuss how this approach can be acceptable or not acceptable. So it did a completely different approach regarding this monument as a testimony of history or preserving monuments. And here I would like to start with the individual, with private initiative, and mentioning family museum, or rather to say collection made by Mykola Nesterenko, former military man. I specifically met him. I went to his village and to this place to interview him, and I was impressed that he doesn't have any sentiment either for Lenin, communism, or restoration of the Soviet life. He said, this is a part of my personal history and I don't want to be vandalized. to the next approach, exhibiting or commodify, an approach which was used through all the post-socialist countries. He listed several parks, themed parks, 3 of them are located in other countries and 3 of them in territory of Ukraine, and they could be united by the main purpose to learn history and to condemn the communist regime. But here, pictures from all the 6 parks, and you can look at them, and you probably, if you didn't visit them, you probably wouldn't distinguish which picture is taken from which park. So they look like a collection of monuments who hardly can speak for themselves. So it's the unprepared visitor can learn any history or to condemn communism. So this genre of themed parks, parks, they're very contested and very highly discussed in scholarship. How to use the place, who should stay on the empty pedestal. Here I would like to mention only a Kyiv example. It was a very long discussion with no result about who could stay on the place of Bessarabka Lenin, religious or historical figures, and there is no result. So this particular place for so long has been used as a place for artistic performances. Here you could see even this visualization can give you an understanding. It was completely, sometimes absolutely different approaches of using this place just to change the meaning. Some of this, when they're more successful, some of them less successful. I visited Kyiv just a couple of days ago. Now it's empty, and this place is definitely calling, at least for me, calling for reframing, for reconsideration, for doing something else. And here, just concluding, last year, we kind of celebrate the 5th anniversary of dehumanization, the 5th anniversary of Leninopad, and Institute of National Remembrance as a government body reported that it was completely successful. I'm sorry, I couldn't find the picture in English, but it said that around 2,500 communist monuments were removed. So it was very successful. We changed toponyms, we're going ahead. But at the same time, the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiative Foundation made a poll and reported about the 6th year of decommunization. And unfortunately, results are very striking. First, almost half of Ukrainians do not approve renaming settlements. Second, this poll shows that Ukraine, unfortunately, still divided regarding the evaluation of Soviet times. Some one group against Soviet times and making negative characteristic, while another one kind of hesitating or still sympathizing Soviet times. And the third, for me, the most upsetting, then in the youngest category, people who were born after the independence of Ukraine, 25% showed indifference in evaluation of Soviet times. And as a result of this discussion, they said that we need to look now more precisely, not only removing monuments, but to make changing in people consciousness. It's much more important in the process of dehumanization and Lenin fall. And here, as a question for further discussion, what does it mean recycling Soviet? It's rewriting or rewriting history. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina, for this very insightful contribution, and also for some of the very verbatim examples of recycling. But I think for us, and we have now some 15 minutes for the discussion, it will be very interesting to compare these completely opposite strategies of handling the problematic memory. On the one hand, the iconoclasm of the Leninopad, which can be compared to Soviet practices of iconoclasm. If you think of the times of revolution and civil war, and on the other hand, a very subtle strategy of aesthetic subversion of the concept of the garden city. I think this opposition will be very interesting for us to discuss, to elaborate a bit more on it. So I started with some kind of remarks to Nadia's contribution. Maybe you could elaborate a bit more on this interesting opposition of anti-nostalgia, but still melancholy, and also the problematics of inside and outside point of view.
Yeah, sure. I guess maybe I wasn't exactly clear or articulated well the melancholy part, because I think it only came up once in my presentation. But basically, thanks to both Boehm and other researchers of nostalgia, but also people who study melancholy as a phenomenon, and especially left melancholy, we know that both of them can be subversive and contain kind of interesting, effective potential. Although I was looking for objects and texts and photographs that eliminate both of this. So kind of the idea was looking at the works of art that work with spaces that are containing this melancholy or nostalgia, as studied by like sociologists, for example, who like study these post-industrial neighborhoods, but carving out a new language that would kind of eliminate or escape or shape a new vision that would be non-melancholy and non-nostalgic. So yeah, I guess the main opposition for me was non-nostalgic vision of nostalgic spaces. Yeah, and inhabiting. So when I was referring to abandoned places, I was referring specifically to the wild green areas, because those were the ones who got abandoned because they are no longer cared by the local city governments, as it used to be in the Soviet times. And it is true, in some of the photographs, we can see some sort of the ruins, maybe something that used to be part of the park, and they got abandoned as well. Sometimes pools or stairs or just parts of outside architecture, but a lot of it is not abandoned. It is still the living residential spaces. And yeah, that was my point as well, I guess, just how the coexistence and interaction between these spaces happen today, because we do kind of commit to this philosophical walks every day, because the way our cities were constructed, I mean, part of them was in embedding these green spaces within our walk to work or school or whatnot. And now, even in my childhood, like for me, passing through abandoned spaces and like overgrown parks on the way to school, because they are there, they still exist. Like, what would that mean? How does that affect our sense of the historical present? I actually have a question to Valentina.
Please go ahead.
I was very curious to learn about the parks. I've seen the park with the underwater monuments, because it's pretty popular. And one of my professors at Smolny actually worked on that one. Yeah, Ilya Kalinin. I don't know if he put out a paper on that, but he definitely did a lecture on that. But also,
yes, he published a paper. I saw that.
And I did not know about the other parks. And I remember in Boehm's book, she was kind of writing about how the park in Moscow, when they used to store the monuments, right? And she was kind of upset in a book that they don't have any description that would like explain what happened to the monuments that they display now in the museum, like that this was torn down, like where. Like I'm just wondering and curious how the parks that you mentioned in Ukraine are arranged, like because you specifically said that they are designed to like learn about history. So are there like any, how does it happen, like through text, through guides? Like I'm just curious.
So I would like to cover only two parks. First one in Frumusheka. It's a very interesting example. It's an interesting territory. It's somewhere in Odessa region, close to Moldavia, somewhere in the steppes. And the park is kind of one among others. So it's a huge cultural space, and it was initiated by a local businessman as a kind of attraction. So there is other places regarding the Bessarabia or Ukrainian or steppe, so kind of local representation, and plus Lenin monuments, a very interesting park, absolutely, but it's kind of included in completely different neighborhood, and it gives kind of different, let's say, aftertaste and impression. Another one is also in Sumy region. It just was opened recently, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in 2019, and also kind of part of a larger park. Initially, it was part of partisan glory, and now it's still remaining on the place, but the local authority and museum staff decided to collect Lenin and monuments and other monuments representing Soviet time and put as an addition to the existing park of partisan glory. So it's now like two-voiced park. From another side, it's still absolutely like a Soviet-looking park, prizing the Ukrainian partisan of movement, and from another side, completely contradictory themed park, exemplifying Soviet times. But still, as I said, stylistic, absolutely the same in most museums. I believe in Hungary, a museum, after the very long critic, they made in addition like a narrated story about socialist time in Hungary, but still it looks very ambivalent, drawn to portray Soviet times. And Ukraine just adding kind of specificity, maybe Ukrainian specificity to this genre, but this contribution doesn't change the nature of the genre itself.
But in your talk, you touched the question of the position, the place, the semantics of the place itself, and when you remove it and put it somewhere on the periphery and in the park, it already
yes, they're not exemplifying the power, or they can't represent the power, but still, yes, thank you so much. Still, we all believe that if we're removing from the very specific symbolic places, these monuments should tell a different story, but unfortunately no. If you enter in a park and looking looking on these monuments, especially being unprepared, you don't know what does it mean. I remember the impression from a park, Grutas Park in Lithuania, in South Lithuania. I went to this park with my Lithuanian colleagues. It was very nice sunny day. It's located in a very nice foresty area. It was full of families of children just playing around, and I couldn't understand what is the purpose of this park. It can be used for condemning communism, or even the telling the story about communist past in Lithuania. It was just themed park, or such kind of Soviet Disneyland. So it's very contested and ambiguous genre. even if you collecting these monuments in completely separate place, which supposed not to make this symbolic story of preference and representation.
Now Valeri is making a silent remark on the topic of Soviet iconography, genealogy. Yes, would you like to
This is I just would like to boast a little that we also in our room. I am sitting in Pushkinsky Dom now. I have several colleagues, for example, Alexander Panchenko, Konstantin Bogdanov, and we took from the garbage this Lenin, this one. You can see that the head of this Lenin is too small in comparison with his body, and this is a special fabricated this Lenins too much in numerous exemplars. And I have another Lenin also. Which one? This is also recycling. This is actually recycling. You can see. We have a lot of Lenin in our room because I'm interested in this question.
Valery, can I consider this as an invitation to come to Pushkinsky Dom?
You can. Why not?
Thank
a lot of people see it, and you can see here. Famous collection, red collection of Lenin's articles, works. So we have a lot of Lenin here. I don't know why we need it, just because they are here. That's all.
Valentina, you can come to Pushkinsky Dom and continue your field work.
Thank you.
From Leninopad to Lenino Park.
Yes.
I would like to boast a little bit more. Just a moment.
I'm receiving so many gifts today. What is it? I can't see.
Yeah. This is a pieces from the old Soviet papers devoted to Soviet writers, including Shevchenko. If you want to know how we interpreted Shevchenko in old times, you can go to St. Petersburg and come to our room and read it if you want.
Thank you for generous invitation. I would definitely use this opportunity. Thank you.
Yes.
Very interesting. A collection of quotations. It looks like albumi.
By the way, it is a sort of recycling because it was a wonderful story many years ago already when I came to my room and I saw a huge amount of books. This one, which was prepared to be taken away from the institute, and I saved them and put it in our room. This is useful collection. They was collected. There is a myth that these books were collected during the blockade of St. Petersburg.
Yeah. Thank you so much, also Valeri and Nadia and Valentina. Fascinating projects, and good luck, Nadia, for your start in Harvard. And so we proceed now to the museological. So we already started with museology, but now we continue the museological part of this panel with the contribution of Antonia Doshen and Petra Milovac. Both of them are curators in the Zagreb Museum of Arts and Crafts. Petra Milovac is also curating digital exhibitions, and they both co-curated the exhibition 60s in Croatia, Myth and Reality, which took place in Zagreb in 2019. Today, they will give their talk on museological interpretations of socialism in Croatia today. And please be aware of the time regime.
Can we start?
Yes, please.
Petra, please, can you share screen? Full screen. Dear participants, I would like to greet you all from Croatia. My name is Antonija Došan, and with my colleague Petra Milovac, I developed the presentation. We will discuss the topic of museological interpretations of socialism in Croatia today, and I hope you find it interesting. The Museum of Arts and Crafts in Zagreb was established in 1880. It is situated on the Republic of Croatia Square, former Marshal Tito Square. 4 years ago, Zagreb stripped Tito's name from this square as a reaction of the political right-wing scene, labeling the communist leader a dictator. On the other hand, the next year, the museum situated at this square openly held an exhibition about the 60s. The historical context in which Croatia finds itself has been a source of cultural recycling. To discuss the topic in the spirit of the general state of retroculture that is encouraged in the West, it is important to understand socialism in former Yugoslavia and in Croatia. In order not to elaborate on the detailed historical context, we can only say that Croatia was part of Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia from 1945 to 1991. It was the second largest republic, and Zagreb was the largest industrial center. Tito was perceived as a leader, as a hero. Radical communism was in force, and in 1948, Yugoslavia was separated from the Eastern Bloc and established its own repressive system. Some of the main milestones in social changes were events, such as the exhibition Family and Household, as you can see it on the screen. It was held on several occasions dedicated to the promotion of modern housing, with the presentation of domestic and foreign products. The era of more favorable political opportunities in relations with the East and West began. The 60s were often referred to as the golden years. New changes took place with the emergence of the Croatian Spring, a cultural and political movement that in the early 1970s saw the rise of Croatia within Yugoslavia. With the liberalization of the 80s after Tito's death, the repressive regime weakened. In the 80s, there was a complete liberalization of the labor market. These are the years when Yugoslavia opened to the West, the years of shopping in Italy, Trieste, the music of the new wave under the influence of the British punk. Finally, in 1991, Croatia gained independence. Countless conflicts within Yugoslavia then led to the Homeland War. For 10 years now, there has been an increased interest in researching the history of the socialist period in historiography, as well as related humanities and museology, both in Croatia and abroad. The popularization of socialism develops through different media, movies, books, exhibitions, today especially video and social networks, certainly the most widespread medium of the new generations. As there was an epidemic of nostalgia on a global level, this movement was reflected within the borders of Croatia, primarily on its cultural scene. The socialist period is beginning to be perceived as the historical experience of an entire generation and the legacy from which one should not run away and generalize facts, but lead constructive discussions and present it from different angles. These examples are not the only ones, and all these projects and initiatives should be a catalyst for fresh reflections and discussions on the historical experience of socialism, away from current political topics that should not seek their legitimacy in a biased perception of the past. Here we see examples of the popularization of socialism today in the world and in Croatia from the Facebook pages such as Retroteka, TV series Black and White World. The fact that there has been a re-evaluation in society, art, life in general, from the time of socialism indicates new trends and the development of us as a society ready to revise the past without retreat. Here we made a terminology and search engine trends of terms Yugoslavia, brutalism in the past 5 years on the left two charts and from 2004 on the right. What is interesting is that the US down left search engine peaks were at the moment during the MoMA exhibition in New York, which bring us to the question, can a museum exhibition influence a research trend? Popularization of socialism through contemporary mediums such as video and especially meme visual culture, from Marx to Bernie Sanders memes, which escalated in an almost global humor in the previous year. The most popular hashtags on social network as we speak are socialist modernism, socialist architecture, socialist memes, while certain communities and pages count more than 100,000 followers. During the last 10 years, in order to get closer to the European museological exhibition trends of socialism and post-war Europe after 1945, a large number of exhibitions on the socialist period were set up in Croatia. Museums have translated it into reality, what has been researched in the sciences for years. Back in 2004, one of the first exhibitions on the socio-cultural aspects of socialism, the 50s in Croatian art, opened in the house of Croatian artists in Zagreb. Without going into detail in the field of curatorial practices in the past, this topic relies on contemporary museological practices largely caused by nostalgia. The discussion of museological interpretations of socialism in modern society is preceded by introspection into the issue of local circumstances. It implies the existence of socialism as a limited time event that now needs to be revised. Here you can see posters and photographs from various exhibitions held over the 10 years, the last 10 years, with the theme of socialism. Among museums, the Museum of the City of Zagreb stands out, which was one of the first in specialized thematic exhibitions, such as case studies. Our museum, the Museum of Arts and Crafts in Zagreb, in connection with its material, also presented several exhibitions on the history of industrial design in the socialist period. In addition to Yugo ceramics manufacturing in 2011, Končar design was presented, the forgotten designer Maria Kalentić and her cosmetic packaging, as well as other projects in cooperation with other institutions. Here we see also photographs from a museum display still insufficiently known to the public. It is the Museum of Red History, launched in Dubrovnik by young researchers in 2019. Its goal is to explore the modern history of Croatia, how it was under the communist regime, and why it all ended in the flames of the Homeland War. It is an interactive project in which, owing to exhibitors' presentation methods, visitor can discover history, be part of it, sit on the old Thomas bike or in a Yugo car, browse an old phone book, find your old number, etc. After a series of projects on the topic of socialism, Croatian museologists from leading museums institutions decided to participate and offer their own approach to the interpretation of socialism, in whose phenomena they themselves participate. We focused on three major cultural projects. As you can see, the exhibition Socialism and Modernity, Art, Culture, Politics from 1950 to 1974 at the Museum of Contemporary Art. The exhibition Reflections of Time from 1945 to 1955, set up at the Klovićevi Dvori Gallery, and the exhibition 60s in Croatia, Myth and Reality, opened at the Museum of Arts and Crafts in 2008. All three mentioned are among the most prominent museum institutions in Zagreb. Despite the very slippery and still sensitive, unresolved, and vaguely defined topic of society, museums have successfully overcome any prejudice by including in their program and financial resources the period of socialism. Perhaps there is a lack of criticism, because a large part of the exhibition preparation was related to careful consideration of the topic due to concerns about the reaction of the services in charge, also the public and the profession itself. In essence, the museological idea of the presentation of socialism is an attempt to civilize the socialist order. The question is whether the museum exhibitions want to point out the renewal of our contemporary Croatian society today, or is it a show of time in order to attract as many visitors as possible? The period of socialism was analyzed from various aspects, but most audience attention was caused by the phenomena of everyday life, most easy to connect with. The exhibition wave, not focused on the study of one case, but on the wider period of socialism, began with the exhibition Socialism and Modernity. The exhibition examined the notion of modernity in the field of art, architecture, design, and popular culture in the context of Yugoslavia and the Cold War. The exhibition was designed by 5 authors who offered their views on the post-war culture of modernism. All authors start from the point of view that this period of our past should not be viewed from the context of a local, limited view, or from the perspective of current political interests, in order to avoid false history and not to diminish the value of cultural heritage. The display is grounded in a sense that pedestals are avoided, making the exhibit seem inviting. Some conscious influence on the audience to bring the topic closer. The main objection of the critics is the inconsistent layout, vaguely limited years that are thematized, but also author interpretation changes. Although the title emphasizes the limits between 1950 and 1974. The exhibition, the second one, Reflections of Time, was realized in cooperation with the Museum of History of Yugoslavia in Belgrade, which points to a comprehensive concept and the fact that the Gallery Klovićevi does not have its own holdings, but the exhibition activity is based on borrowing objects from the other museums or artists. The author of the concept imagined the exhibition set up in 3 parts: history, art, and society. The exhibition tells the story about the ideals of freedom, equality, and justice on which our parents and grandparents were raised. The exhibition covers the first post-war years, marked by the constitution of a new world order. Special importance was placed on material borrowed from Belgrade, including personal items and works of art from the area where Josip Broz Tito lived and worked. Despite the discomfort and opposition of the majority of the Croatian population today to the memory of Josip Broz Tito, the exhibition sought to warn of censorship and taboos, both then and now. The period covered by the exhibition is marked by the ubiquity of the official ideology of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia in all aspects of society. Political events also reflected on the everyday life of citizens, on art, and on education. One of the main bearers of the idea of the exhibition were posters, one of the most important media tools of the socialist period, communicating imperatively with the public. For example, with forceful work, let's speed up the reconstruction of the country. The disadvantage of this exhibition that was held in Zagreb was that it tried to compensate for the lack of important materials in the exhibition by processing them within the catalog. For example, a very important topic was omitted, such as the Festival of Yugoslav Feature Film in Pula, the Center of Yugoslav Filmography. This festival is not mentioned at the Zagreb exhibition nor in the catalog within the chapter on Croatian film. So Pula's cooperation with the Croatian radio and television, also with Jadran Film, was necessary in order to correct this mistake. There is often a case of dissonance between the designer's exhibition setup and the authors of the text within the catalog. who are often not sufficiently versed in what is to be emphasized or what will surely be exhibited in the set. So they go into theory rather than relying on concrete examples. The Pula version of the exhibition made up for everything that was missing in Zagreb at the exhibition of the same name, regardless of the fact that the items from the Museum of History of Yugoslavia returned to Belgrade. The period covered by the exhibition 60s in Croatia is limited by two political events: the removal of the political leadership in Croatia and cleansing of the movement called the Croatian Spring. But do not think that taking these political events as the limit of a period also influenced the choice of topics that were represented in the exhibition. Critics pointed out that just looking at the concept of this exhibition, it is clear that the involvement of a large number of collaborators, various researchers and scientists resulted in an overabundance of ideas, proposals, and subjective interpretations that sought to cover all areas of culture, art, but perhaps least politics. The fact that the exhibition was at a museum of national importance for the preservation of applied art in Croatia perhaps contributed to a detailed analysis of applied and fine art of that time. Due to a large number of exhibits, almost 2,000 of them, during the preparations, it was decided that they could be divided into A and B groups. Those with B mark would be complementary to the main A exhibits. B exhibits were mostly mediated through descriptive text placed on plywood, as you can see it on these photographs on the walls. In the image above, there is an example of an A exhibits in display cases and on shelves, while above them is a series of plywood panels with images and descriptions, lists of A and B objects. What happened here is that it was not obvious to distinguish A objects from B objects, see their connection, nor distinguish the original object from a reproduction. For example, in the case of photographs that are also on plywood. As critics noticed, this kind of setup proved to be unclear and almost impossible to follow. Although it was a fine concept of A and B objects and worked on some trial pairs of objects, as the selection process lagged after the design process, it was late to discover that this concept was not applicable to the whole selection, or rather inclusion, as the number of objects was growing. Here we can see in cross-section basic data of all three exhibitions in order to indicate that in the interval of 7 years in which they were created, the focus was primarily on quantity, not on quality. Research also established that some exhibitions were a response to omitting the knowledge of certain experts. As for some of them, there was a need to repeat the project with an emphasis on other phenomena. This has led to issues such as selection problematics. The idea of cultural recycling would sometimes mean the possibility of repeating the same material over and over again. The time period of 7 years within which these exhibitions were created is too short, and a much longer time lag is needed. This indicates the lack of an innovative approach in interpreting the socialist period. Cars, such as Fico, are exhibited as a central feature in both Museum of Contemporary Art and Museum of Arts and Crafts. The emphasis is on the repeating phenomena that identify the period, but without going into multi-layered introspection. The commercial for Dodo powder, the film From 3 to 10, armchairs by designer Bernardo Bernardi, and many other objects were also repeated. Here we see a similar approach in the spatial concept of the exhibition, where in the same room, examples of industrial design are added to prominent works of fine art. Looking at these two comparative photographs from the exhibitions at the Museum of Arts and Crafts and Klovićevi Dvori Gallery, the approach to the exhibition policy of two different exhibitions is clearly indicated. The setup on the left resembles a definition of order and organization, characteristic of the early communist period represented by Lenin, we have it also, bust, and reliefs of Marx and Engels, connected by communist and workers' slogans such as "No more return to the old." To the right is an image of the exhibition of the 60s, with product and graphic design section embodying the idea of capitalism, mass production, and consumer mentality. Are there subliminal messages of order, communism, and chaos capitalism in that? The appearance of dichotomy between the objects at some of these exhibitions is a result of the desire to include everything available. As we point out the problems of different setups, we wonder whether it is still too early for interpretations of the socialist period in museology. Shouldn't more time be given to post-socialist reflections on what we have gone through as a society, on the transition that is still emphasized in some spheres, so that we can look more clearly at the past? With this presentation, we wanted to present how the period of socialism was recycled in the museum profession, and what were the approaches to interpretations of that time in the 3 largest museums in Croatia. We can conclude that inspiration was found not only in the subjects of the socialist era, but also in its spirit and ideology. Museological interpretations are mostly caused by nostalgia and less driven by revanchism. What turned out to be intriguing at an exhibition abroad is then in our country also recognized as an important moment of the period and is repeatedly recycled. This constant fixation on the same objects and events leads to repetition and rewriting. It also recycles more often what was once on the margins or in the memory of the individual involved in the project, and less what really marked a period. For example, sports, feminism. The lack of new knowledge and controversy between these exhibitions, which were held 7 years apart, points to the fact that there was a saturation in the museological interpretation of this period, and the approach to projects were more instinctive, perhaps due to the need for museums to keep pace with notable international museums and the exhibition scene, without sufficient time interval between each project presented. Thank you all for your attention. I hope you really find it informative. Here you can find some related links for further research. Our emails also, in case you find the need to contact us, and for any additional info. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonia, and thank you, Petra, who was also somehow involved in the presentation. Yes, I would say we just continue with the contribution by Silvia Nehring, because it is also museological, and it will be interesting to compare different concepts maybe of nostalgia in what you told us, Antonia and Petra. So the development, there seem to be a development from a kind of restorative nostalgia to more reflective positions, even though to speak of nostalgia at all in the context of Yugoslavia, if only Croatia is at stake, is also very, it's complex and not so easy to handle. For me, it would be interesting to get to know if there are comparable exhibitions about the 60s in Belgrade, for instance. So yeah, so maybe we can discuss this afterwards. But now to Silvia Nehring. Silvia Nehring is a historian. She defended her PhD at the University of Torun in 2020. And she participated in many different international museum project, and now she is working as a free professional museologist. Her contribution today is on disillusions and nostalgia in museums of communism in Poland.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me and can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So let's start. With my presentation, I want to give you an image of the Polish museums of communism, how everything looks and works like. So Poland has no national or even big formal museum of modern history. The museum narrative of communism is based on several regional and private sites. In the process of working through the communist period, the lack of cooperation between the ruling elites and the academic community is evident. Nowadays, many images and narrations about PRL, so Polish People's Republic, coexist, which are more and more often used in mass culture. Uncertainty of modern times, economic and social crisis, pandemics, undermines confidence in the prevailing system of social security. A distorted image of the past appears as a period of carefree everyday life. It ignores all the threats at the time. The space where you can see the clash of historical narratives and social perceptions are museum exhibitions. And I want to show you this on the example of 4 small museums. Museum of Life in Polish People's Republic in Warsaw, State Agriculture Farm, Museum in Bolegorzyn, Museum House of Polish People's Republic in Toruń, and Pomeranian Regional Museum of Polish People's Republic in Sępólno-Krajeńskie. Here on the slide you can see the list of all museums, but about this I will talk a little bit later. So why I've chosen those small 4 museums? The museum in Warsaw is the most recognizable and most visited by foreigners. The museum in Toruń, although much less known, benefits from its proximity to Toruń Old Town, which was visited by 2.5 million tourists in 2019. Within 2 years, it has become part of the city's tourist landscape. Muzeum in Sępólno-Krajeńskie seems to be a regional one, but this is not confirmed by the numbers of visitors and the fact that it's recognized all over the country. The last one is Museum of State Agriculture Farm, which was closed down this year, and the objects were moved to Drawsko-Pomorskie, where in 2 years' time, a center devoted probably to the Polish countryside in the post-war history will be established. I decided to mention this museum because the agriculture subject matter, which has not been presented anywhere else. So I need to add that my reflections refer to the all small museums, the private ones, which you can see on the half of the slide, where the exhibitions actually are similar. Yeah. So I need to say 2 words about politics of memory. So governmental activities of the last 20 years in the field of politics of memory have been dominated by illustration and prosecuting collaborators with previous system. No database were undertaken, as in Germany, to state survey commissions, no work on exhibitions recommendations in museums. In shaping historical memory and stimulating database about it, national museums remain forgotten. The only thing we can say is the Institute of National Remembrance, Commission for the Prosecutions of Crimes Against the Polish Nation, called IPN, which was established in 1998. For 20 years, it has been the most important institution in the country for documenting and showing also as an exhibition, small exhibitions, information about Nazi and communist crimes. Did we have ideas of museums about, of communism? Yes, we did 2 great ones. First of them was Socialist in Warsaw, and the second one was Museum of Polish People's Republic in Krakow. Initiator of both ideas back in the 90s was world-famous director Andrzej Wajda. The project of the first of them was created around 2001, and around 2008, organizational problems focused the attention of the Socialist creators on the Krakow Center. Initially, it functions as a museum of Nowa Huta, so a part of the city right now. And both projects are actually example of how, as a result of lack of support and willingness of politicians at various levels, a great idea can turn into a project of regional importance. So, What kind of museums presenting communism exist in Poland? At this stage, I would like to present a map of Poland with marked locations and profiles of these institutions. I have identified three main themes: political history, history of everyday life, and local history. And I hope you can see the map well. And with violet color, you can see big regional museums where there is a history of politics. And when we talk about Pan Tadeusz, as Museum of Pan Tadeusz in Wrocław, so the whole museum is devoted to Adam Mickiewicz and his work, Pan Tadeusz, but there is also an exhibition about Władysław Bartoszewski, and according to his life, Władysław Bartoszewski and one person, according to their life, you can see what happened in Polish history, yeah? In the second part on the 20th century. But this exhibition is not so well known. People associate this museum with Adam Mickiewicz. With orange color, you can see regional centers, and where regional history or history of the city is shown, and the green ones are the small private institutions. Yeah, and Professor Anna Ziembielska-Witek proposed a division of historical exhibitions on PRL. The historian mentioned identity heroic museums, martyrological exhibitions, representative exhibitions. The first group is made up identity museums, which Witek includes European Solidarity Center in Gdańsk, Poznań Uprising Museum, the Pod History Center in Wrocław, and Breakthroughs Dialogue Center in Szczecin. The narrative is about PRL. The narrative about the PRL is interwoven with the history of the city, the region, or given event, and forms a background, a point of reference for them. This also made this institution outside the field of interest for this speech. Martyrdom exhibitions are primarily exhibitions in the chambers of remembrance, in prisons or places associated with resistance and the authority, to the authorities. So I haven't put them on this map too, yeah? And this is what we are interested in. Representative exhibitions are private commercial institutions whose expositions are based on the feeling of nostalgia, thematically focused on everyday life. These are grassroots institutions, often created by enthusiasts, collectors. Existing institutions refer to PRL as a whole or most of it, even if they don't show the subject in this way. Note that these are not professional museums institutions in this area. Poland is still waiting for such. So I will now briefly profile the four museums. Their photos are included in the presentation to make it easier to understand what forms of narration and presentation are involved. Instead of discussing them separately, I will list the common features and what generally characterize these types of institutions. They were established relatively recently, Bolegorzin in 2008, Warsaw in 2014, and after the move 2018, I think, and Toruń and Sępólno-Krajeńskie both in 2019. The exhibits are mostly divided into the following spaces: living room, children's room, kitchen, bathroom, infirmary, pharmacy, kiosk, cafeteria, nursery, antique car exhibit. And existing expositions only sketch the subject superficially. They are chaotic in terms of chronology, choice of objects, choice of subjects. They are based not on the knowledge of the epoch, but on the subjective image and on interpretation. The narrative is fractured. There are no transitions to modern times or any points of discussion. There is no explanation of why these times went away, what made people not want them, which led to the transformation. The creators and owners are not professional historians, and no historians were hired to create or revise the concept. Objects are sourced on regular online auctions like Amazon from collectors rather than experts. And to know the ideas and aims of the institutions, I have spoken with the owners of them, and during the talk, each of them reiterated that the exposure they created was so. As Warsaw, the look and narrative are my own individual vision of the era, and the museum was not created for someone but for something, to save a way of life. Now, what I heard in Toruń, the House of the Polish People's Republic is instead a clarification referring to the history of everyday life and even more, to the house and people and activists connected with it. And what I heard in Sempolno-Krajeńskie, the exhibition is my own interpretation of history and presents my own ideas. So after knowing the expositions, what can I say about nostalgia by exposure? I will give you just 2 examples, yeah? And what you can see also on the slides. So Toruń, what can you say, for example, about Toruń? The most emotional is living room. Yeah, we had it already. Not only as a meeting place, but also as a center of life. Visitors often describe it with words just like grandmas. Similar reactions, but less frequent, are for the bathroom. The reviews emphasize the warmth of the place and the relaxed atmosphere, which is often manifested by saying thank you for your hospitality instead of goodbye. A visit may remind you of a journey deep into your childhood and memories. It's also clearly balancing on the edge of nostalgia, which for the average viewer is not noticeable. This is actually because of the wonderful owner. The lady is extremely exciting person, and she gives this museum life, yeah? So this makes it a little bit, well, from the scientific point of view, as a subject of discussion. So what about Sempolno-Krajeńskie, for example? Here we have right now. I heard from the owner that all the generations often cry when they see specific exhibits, remembering their youth, a happy and carefree time that will not return. Perhaps knowing this emphasizes the emotional dimension of the exposition. The owner has observed phenomenon of utopia among visitors who perceive the PRL as a more stable time for the young. What's important, these things are not on the small private exhibitions, but people seeing them start talking about their reflections, yeah? And other thing now, noteworthy is the sphere of relaxation. Here we have it. It can be assumed that it starts with a Fiat car, but also today, a car once, but also today a dream of many Poles. That time was a luxury good, today from the hobbyistic perspectives. You can also see the typical tent, striped desk chair, and so on. Camping has been an important part of the leisure culture, but this is so far the only place I know of that makes reference to it. In Germany, for example, allotments and tent camping picked up part of national canon of representing the GDR era. I mean, museums, Haus der Geschichte, Zeitgeschichtliches Forum, Deutsches Historisches Museum, or Museum in der Kulturbrauerei. Yeah? You can see in each of these museums, you can see almost identical parts of exhibition. And what characterizes Polish museums of PRL? There is no formal division into parent and regional sites, the leading exhibition centers. Kraków, Poznań, Wrocław, Szczecin, and Gdańsk focus on regional or even fragmented view. Nevertheless, emerging local government and private institutions are creating an intentionally network museum landscape, what's extremely important. There were many calculations on the PRL period, but the lack of an official national presentation as a point of reference for the others creates chaos. The problem will not refer to the witnesses of history, but for the younger generations born in 90s or 2000s, yeah? Unfortunately, it has to be said that the above-mentioned museums initiatives are absent from the public consciousness. So far, there hasn't been any temporary exhibition like this, like in German, for example, Unequal Sisters, yeah, about women in East and West Germany, or exhibitions about portraits of East Germans. There is also any organization or foundation like Haus der Geschichte or Stiftung zur Aufarbeitung der Diktatur. I mean, in Germany, there are many small and private museums, but due to this foundation and these big exhibitions, everything seems to be ordered, completed. In Poland, the situation is opposite, yeah, as you can see on the example of the small museums. And but why these museums are so important? Firstly, because they are, and in the name they refer to bygone era, of the very good regional, the bigger ones, museums. Only in Poznań Uprising Museum and European Solidarity Center in Gdańsk do this. Perhaps the fact that they are grassroots and private institutions without any political connection also counts for their popularity. And I want to mention also the point of view of visitors, because this is important. And instead of talking with visitors caused by pandemic's penal laws, I've analyzed the comments and reviews of these museums that are in Google. And after reading many of reviews, this is what I got. Exhibitions occur as an association with childhood, time of joy, blissful life and play, what is obvious. Chronologically, today 50-year-olds were present on the labor market at the time for the change of the political system. Some of them had or were just starting their families. However, these reflections are not there, not in the comments. And actually, they were a big part of life of those people. In the comments on the Google, there are no references to spending leisure time with loved ones, forms of entertainment. This is extremely interesting because all exhibitions are about this. References to the communist era are few and consist of brief reflection on the system and government title, "It's good thing it's over." Several times there was a reference to the militians costume, but not as a warning, but as an opportunity to dress up and have fun. This is very disturbing phenomenon, showing the shallowness of associations and analysis in today's 30s, 50-year-olds, and the process of suppressing what is bad. Everyday items and, interestingly, food stuff are mentioned. The best example are the Warsaw reviews, where almost regularly there is a reference with a photo of wuzetka cake and lemonade called oranżada. Still, almost every reviewer recommends or even stress the need to see the exhibitions and the venue. And now the last thing I want to say, can we see or hear from the visitors any disillusions on these exhibitions? Yes. And although I referred to 4 museums, the common elements understood as disillusions include, among the disadvantages of modern times, visitors mention mainly the lack of empathy, social empathy, leisure time, sense of security, fear of loss of work and income. State care is cited in the organization of extracurricular education like community centers, and reflection for children and families like summer camps. Interestingly, these themes are not presented at exhibitions, yet visits to museums evoke associations with them. In contrast, the contemporary lack of interest in these topics on the part of, for example, municipal authorities are cited. People see this and complain about this, so this is also extremely important. Longing for old life, but in terms of the peace of life and interpersonal relations, this perspective is a disappointment of the present day, but also evokes intense nostalgic reactions. And I think that for this point, this is all I can say. I mean, we can go to discussion and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Silvia, for this also very rich contribution on this specific, especially on the specific type of private museum and its role in competition with official state museums. And it would be interesting to discuss this type of museum also in a more comparative perspective, I would say. Maybe the 3 of you have questions to each other.
I can
comments. Antonio, we cannot hear you.
I said it's true. I maybe have some questions because of the article that we are going to write later. But I want to say that is the situation in Poland very similar to Croatian situation today. And the Museum of Red History that is opened in Dubrovnik is something like is made up on this idea of popularization of socialism. But mostly because it's in Dubrovnik and tourists are searching for some history context of Croatia. And it's a great museum. I didn't know it. I didn't know for it because it was opened 2 years ago, and it was a COVID-19 situation after it. And it's a really a good idea because it's not opened inside the institution, from the institution, but from three persons, youngsters, young people that are born after 1990s. And they made it because they feel nostalgic because of their parents and grandparents, and they said their houses are full of the things and books and old items that are connected or are made in socialism. So I also want to refer to Valentina Karkun presentation, and to say that Croatian is still too shy about showing off the monuments, so it's not happening here still. And monuments in Croatia are still destroyed and are not coming back soon, and I think never, because there is no public opinion and public will to bring them back, even in the display, like museum display. So that's really bad, because many of the statues in Croatia are made by most prominent sculptors, and we lost them forever. I think there is no hope for many of them. So it's very interesting to see that they can live and have afterlife also. And maybe it's because the situation of homeland war in Croatia, it was so stressful and hard for many of people after we get out of communism. So that's why the people cannot accept it yet still. And that's why we only can, for now, make the exhibition inside the institution, like in our museum and in other that we mentioned. And I want to refer to case of, I think last year, it was a European project, Rijeka 2020. It was the city on Croatian coast. It was a host of European culture in that time. And one artist wanted to put a big red star on the main square in Rijeka, and he put it. And then the same day, was protesting. People were protesting, and they needed to go up on the building and put it down. So it was like a performance, but it didn't last longer than a day. So I think it's still too. We need more time to pass, and I think we need a new generation to go back and to analyze the past, and then to make the exhibitions, make the monuments, I mean, save them, and only then we can prosper.
From my side, is it all? Can I say all?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to say some things from my side. So in Poland, we are extremely waiting for the Museum of Polish History, and it was established in 2006. And the permanent exhibition was meant to be open this year, but we need to wait a little bit longer. It will be like German Historical Museum, so with whole Polish history. And the history of modern times will be the biggest gallery. This and 19th century, but there will be the biggest amount of historical objects. And for my PhD, I worked on the concept of this part of exhibition, and it will be really amazing. It will be stunning, but we need to wait, like I think 2 years more. And when this museum finally will be opened, everything will change, yeah, because we get narrative, this official national narrative about newest history. The second thing is what I find interesting. The owners of those small museums are people in their 30s and 40s. Not older ones, yeah. And the only exception is State Farm Museum, which was created firstly by people who were born in state agriculture farms. So they were farmers and circa 50, 60 years old, and then they decided to rescue this knowledge about countryside, after-war countryside. And what's also interesting, the biggest amount of visitors are people who are in their 50s in the small private museums. But there are more and more young people, like between 80 and 30 years old. And what's interesting, those in high school organize 18th birthday parties there, yeah, or parties. And people who get married go to make the wedding photo session. So we've got two completely different ways of seeing these institutions. What's also interesting, there is Institute of Public Opinion, and they make each year research. And according to research from last 5 years, more and more Poles are interested in historical museums and use their offers. And also from another research, we know that for Poles, the most important events in Polish history of the 20th and 21st century are not World War II, but history from the 80s and 90s. So we can see this how nation thinks, and this what we really right now have in politics. Yeah. So two ways. And to your last words to your presentation. So former one, there were articles about temporary exhibitions to subject of PRL, and it was like, I don't know the numbers, but it was like 6 about big politics, then 6 about oppositions and history of East Bloc generally, and like about more than 20 about everyday life history. And they referred to design and way of life of general way of life. So when I saw pictures of your temporary exhibitions, those in Poland were almost similar, yeah? So I think that is a canon of showing the subjects which is similar in each country.
Okay, may I jump into discussion? I have a comment and question for Sylvia. First of all, thank you for bringing our attention to private museums. I like them since I'm now currently working on this particular topic, Museum of Communism. I love private museums most of all, for one simple reason. As you showed, they look almost very similar to each other, and they can be differentiated by the organizers. They're all different, and I would even suggest that they are the main objects portrayed in the museum, because they always have like a motivation behind them. And I believe in studying of this genre of private museum, it's much more interesting to study what is the motivation. In your presentation, you frame it like disillusion and nostalgia. It's kind of concerns me a little bit, because I believe that the range of the variation of motivations, it's much more larger. You mentioned a museum in Bydgoszcz. I've been in many museums you mentioned, because I conducted a field study in Poland a couple of years ago, and for me it was the most impressive in Bydgoszcz, because as far as I remember, the reason to establish this museum to recreate the area. The area is under the construction. Youth are living building. They plan to use, the building existed before, they plan to use like a spa salon or something like that to attract people. But finally, they came to conclusion to make a memory about these local places, and maybe this attempt will bring tourists and somehow define the place to give like to provide renaissance or something like that. And when I meet people, organizers, you know, a lot of people came to meet me because it was interesting to look at Ukrainian professor, so came so far to look at the museum. I was just amazed by their attention, how much energy, how much love they put into this museum. It's not professional museum, absolutely, but it's not disillusion and it's not nostalgia. So my main, you know, kind of suggestion or concern, you know, it might not be kind of very well working framework for what you're saying, because the field study you might, it's completely great, but the framework is somehow too narrow from, in my opinion. Thank you.
I can I? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. So I can now say that, yeah, the whole idea came from those people, and you are completely right. And now on the new project, so in Drawsko-Pomorskie there are all objects right now, and in Bologorze I think there is anything more, yeah. And on new project of this museum of PGR are working now. They will be working also scientists or professors from agriculture academies and universities. So I dream that it will be a big project, and maybe in my workplace we will also have them, and it can be turned into a big professional museum. Yeah, but this will take like 2 years. But this was an exception from all small museums. And next week, because before for my PhD thesis, I concentrated on big national museums and they and how they create identity. Yeah. And now I'm moving to the small museums, private ones, and next week I'm starting a journey, and I'm going to see almost all of them and try to research.
Say hello from me.
Okay, yeah. So this conference and all your presentations are extremely inspiring, believe me.
Yeah, thank you. It probably will be interesting to see, or maybe you got to know already, if there is any kind of dialogue between the two, so private amateur museums and the official ones. So maybe if we observe for a certain time period the developments, we can see that ideas from the amateur museums wander to the official ones. Yeah, so this could be also interesting, and also to differentiate between strategies of critically distancing and strategies of appropriation of memory in order to identify. But appropriation can also be critical in a sense. So maybe this kind of typology of different strategies of handling the heritage is important. When Antonia gave her talk, she touched this question of heritage in connection to one of these exhibitions, and the attempt to save the heritage as it is, instead of somehow modeling it and appropriating it. And yeah, so in a more historical perspective, we can see that heritage as such is always a process of appropriating and modifying the inheritance.
Yes, yes.
Yes,
I
so-
just want to say, I just wanted to say that it's not everything heritage that comes from socialism, according to the public, to the many researchers. So something that is on the street, like a monument, and it's from socialism, it's going to be mostly in many times destroyed. And if we put it in a museum, it's going to have its own public and space. It's interesting, it's not the same in all Croatia. So in the meantime, on my vacation on the island Rab, and it's really near on the Adriatic Sea, and it's really near close by the Goli Otok. It was an island with prison in Tito's year. So as I can see these days going through the island, there is many of monuments from communist period, from partisans, and they are really good, in good shape. They are not destroyed. They are people are. I saw in a few of them are putting candles and the lights. So I think it's maybe it's because of the Goli Otok that is nearby. Maybe it's because the people here didn't feel the war so much as some people on the continent, on northern Croatia. So I hope one day all not only monuments, but history and some items from socialism will become a heritage, and it's going to be something that we will give to our grandchildren, and they are going to ask what happened in 80s, what happened in 70s, and we cannot present them that period only in exhibitions that are highlighting the items that are recognized in abroad. Because like in Moman's exhibition about architecture, of concrete architecture in Yugoslavia, it was all about architecture and buildings that are abandoned now. And it's not everything that we have. It's now popular, but I think everything, not only the items, the subject, but the spirit of that time need to be on some level protected. So for better knowing the past, I think only that then we can have a better future.
It could be interesting to compare the Croatia exhibition, the 60s in Croatia could be interesting to compare to the Saw exhibition that took place in Moscow a few years ago in the Tretyakovka. The pictures you demonstrated reminded me a lot of this exhibition. So we are running out of time, but there was a hand raised by Arkadiusz Lewicki.
I've got, thank you very much for very interesting topics. I don't saw my face, but I listen very carefully. I've got one very short question to our Croatian friends, because I was in Croatia and I found something. If I may share the screen, tell me, is that true or is that fake for tourists?
Yes, what?
I don't know. I found something like that in some shop.
In Croatia?
In Croatia, yes.
Maybe, I'm not sure where did you take the photo, but every day, still, in this year, once a year, Kumrovec, that is a place where the Josip Broz Tito was born, and his native house is there. and people from mostly Serbia and Slovenia goes there, and so they sell many items like this one, I assume, and it's the place of keeping the spirit of Tito alive, and communism and socialism. So maybe I never see this one, something like this in Zagreb. So
okay.
Maybe
so I was very curious. It's the fake. It's made nowadays, or it's the real thing from Yugoslavian past?
I don't remember. I remember many items from socialist period. I was born in it. My parents still got many of items from that time, and I'm following many online pages on Facebook, like Retroteka Slavorum, that is handling the socialism history. I never see something like that. I think it's something new. Maybe it's from Kumrovec. I think it's something.
It's from, I see it in Rovni. It's the small.
Dubrovnik. Oh,
no,
maybe it's
Rovni. Rovni. It's the.
Maybe
the
it's
north
coming from Montenegro.
Marketplace. It was very interesting for me.
A really funny case of recycling.
Yeah.
Yugo, so this an example of Yugo nostalgia. Yes. Thank you so much for really fascinating presentations and a lively discussion. And now enjoy.
Thank you, Susan, for sharing and for your questions and inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now enjoy the lunch break. Valerie, would you like to announce something? No. Thank you.